A police officer vanished during a blizzard on the outskirts of Cold Ridge, Montana. His patrol car was found half buried in ice, engine still running, door left open. But there was no sign of Officer Daniel Hayes. For 3 days, the search teams scoured the frozen woods and found nothing, except his German shepherd, Shadow, pacing the snow as if guarding something unseen. When a local veterinarian examined the dog, she discovered traces of a strange metallic toxin, the same kind once used in secret military experiments. What began as a rescue mission soon unraveled a truth darker than the storm itself, a betrayal born in war, a revenge long frozen beneath the snow, and a bond that even death refused to break. This is the story of the Winter Oath, of loyalty that defied design, and a dog's love that turned poison into a miracle. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from. The wind screamed through the mountains of Montana, driving snow sideways across the highway and swallowing the world in white. The night was merciless, the kind of cold that turned breath into shards of glass. Officer Daniel Hayes, 38, pressed through the storm, his flashlight slicing through the dark like a thin blade. Tall and broad-shouldered, Daniel moved with the slow, practiced caution of a man who had learned the hard way that death was never loud. It was patient. His face, roughened by stubble and years of windburn, was carved with quiet endurance. The left side of his jaw bore a faint scar from a roadside bomb in Afghanistan. Since the war, he'd lived in silence. No wife, no children, only the job and his loyal partner. Beside him padded Shadow, a 6-year-old German shepherd with a coat of black and tan, thick enough to resist the snow. Shadow's eyes gleamed amber in the flashlight's beam, alert and intelligent. Every muscle in his body was tuned to Daniel's movements, mirroring his master's tension. The dog's breath came out in steady clouds, his paws crunching over frozen ground. They had been tracking a stolen SUV that crashed near Frost Creek Ridge, where the forest met the river. The suspect had fled into the storm. "Unit 7 in pursuit," Daniel said into his radio, but all he got was static. The blizzard had swallowed every signal. Ahead, through the veil of snow, faint footprints led toward an old wooden bridge spanning the frozen creek. The boards groaned beneath Daniel's boots as he crossed, his hand near his holster, heart hammering louder than the wind. A shape darted across the far end of the bridge, a man in a dark coat, hunched against the storm. Daniel lifted his light, but the beam only caught the glint of metal, a gun. "Police, drop your weapon!" he shouted. The words were torn away by the wind. A muzzle flash split the darkness. The bullet struck Daniel high on the shoulder, spinning him sideways. He stumbled, his light flying from his hand, rolling across the bridge before tumbling into the snow below. "Shadow!" he gasped. The dog lunged forward, barking ferociously, but another shot rang out, splintering the railing inches from him. "Stay," Daniel commanded, voice hoarse. But the storm devoured his words. He drew his own gun, fired twice into the swirling white. No return fire, no movement, just wind. His vision blurred. The pain burned down his side, warm blood seeping beneath his vest. Shadow circled him anxiously, whining. Daniel dropped to one knee, pressing his hand to the wound. The world tilted. Then, from the edge of the bridge, a strange shimmer caught his eye, a smear on the snow where the suspect had stood moments ago. Under his flashlight's fading beam, the mark glowed faintly metallic, silver mixed with red. Daniel frowned through the haze of pain. He'd seen something like this before, in a classified military report about an experimental nerve, compound. It didn't just kill, It corrupted, spreading through the bloodstream like mercury. His stomach turned. Could it be the same? Could the man he'd chased be someone from that past he tried to bury? The wind howled louder, as if answering him. The wooden boards beneath him creaked dangerously. Shadow barked again, hackles raised. Somewhere in the dark, a faint crunch of boots echoed, too far to see, too close to ignore. Daniel turned toward the sound. "Show yourself!" Then came the third shot. The bridge shuddered. Daniel felt the railing splinter beside him. His leg slipped on the icy planks and he fell sideways. Shadow lunged, teeth flashing, jaws clamping onto Daniel's jacket, trying to hold him back. For a split second, man and dog locked eyes, loyalty against gravity. "Go!" Daniel shouted. His voice was both command and plea. Shadow growled, refusing. Then the wood gave way with a sharp crack, and Daniel plunged into the darkness below. Snow and ice closed around him, stealing breath and light. Above, Shadow barked furiously at the broken bridge, running back and forth, whining into the storm. He lowered his head toward the hole, but the chasm below was a void of blowing snow. The dog leapt down the slope, slipping, searching, his paws cutting trails through the powder. He reached the frozen creek and sniffed frantically. No scent, no movement, only a splash of blood melting into the ice. His ears flattened. He howled once, a long, mournful sound that vanished into the wind. When dawn came, the bridge stood half buried in snow. The patrol car's lights still blinked dim red through the storm, but there was no sign of Officer Hayes. Only Shadow remained, pacing the riverbank, refusing to leave the place where his partner had vanished. The storm rose again, covering their tracks, sealing every trace of what had happened. Somewhere under the frozen current, the darkness held its secret. The storm had passed, but the silence it left behind was heavier than the snow itself. The sun rose weakly over Frost Creek, spilling a dim, colorless light across the frozen valley. The world looked still, untouched, except for the broken bridge where Officer Daniel Hayes had vanished 3 nights ago. His patrol car remained half buried in snow, its red lights still blinking faintly, casting a pulse of color on the endless white. Near the creek, a dark figure moved, not human, but loyal beyond reason. Shadow, Daniel's German shepherd, 6 years old and once majestic, now appeared smaller, leaner, his fur matted with frost. He had not left the riverbank since the night his master fell. His paws were raw, his eyes hollow yet alert, refusing food, refusing warmth. When rescue teams approached, he growled and barked, circling the same spot again and again, as though guarding an invisible presence beneath the snow. Deputy officers called for help from Dr. Grace Nolan, the town's only veterinarian. Grace, in her early 40s, was a woman of quiet strength. Tall, slender, with chestnut hair often tied in a messy braid, and a face marked not by beauty, but by kindness. Her blue eyes carried a sadness born of years treating injured animals that rarely survived. She arrived bundled in a long brown coat, her boots crunching over the frost. She knelt beside Shadow, her gloved hands gentle but firm. "Easy, boy," she whispered. Shadow froze, watching her warily, then finally let her touch his muzzle. Grace felt the dog's pulse, slow, uneven. She lifted his paw, noticing tiny metallic specks clinging to the fur around his wound, glinting faintly in the light. At first, she thought it was salt from the road, but under her lens, it shimmered oddly, like liquid silver. Frowning, she turned to the deputies. "This isn't normal frostbite. There's something else in his system. They brought Shadow to the town's veterinary clinic, a small wooden building with peeling white paint, once a family home. Inside, the air smelled faintly of antiseptic and hay. Grace cleaned the blood from his fur, drew a sample, and placed it under the microscope. What she saw made her lean back in disbelief. Microscopic filaments of metallic residue threaded through the dog's bloodstream. It wasn't poison as she knew it. It looked almost engineered. She printed the slide and stared at it, whispering to herself, "What happened out there, boy?" Meanwhile, at the Frost Creek command post, Captain Robert Miller arrived to oversee the investigation. Robert, 55, was broad and graying, with the weary eyes of a man who had seen both glory and guilt in uniform. Once Daniel's superior in Afghanistan, he'd since become the sheriff of Cold Ridge County. He carried the authority of experience and the heaviness of loss. When he saw the frozen bridge, something in his face hardened. "He went over right here?" he asked the deputy, the young man nodded. "We found the dog by the river every morning, same place." Robert's jaw tightened. He crouched near the edge, brushing away snow. There, faint but visible, was a streak of something metallic, mixed with blood, the same glint Grace had seen. His gut twisted. He had seen this once before, years ago, in a classified military lab during an investigation into a failed experiment. The memory surfaced unwanted. Men coughing silver from their lungs, dying with their veins turned to mercury. He had buried that chapter of his life, along with the name of the man responsible, Evan Cole. That evening, Robert drove to the clinic to check on Shadow. Grace looked up from her desk as he entered, brushing hair from her tired face. "He's stable, but weak. I've never seen anything like this, Captain. It's as if something foreign is inside him. Not a parasite, more like..." She hesitated. "A weapon." Robert's expression darkened. "A weapon?" he repeated. Grace nodded slowly. "If it's what I think, it's not natural." She handed him the printed slide. Robert studied it under the lamp's glow, then set it down carefully. "This is military," he said quietly, more to himself than to her. "Very old, and very illegal." Grace frowned. "You think whoever attacked Officer Hayes used it?" "I think whoever did this," Robert said, his voice low, "wanted him dead in a way no one would understand." Outside, the wind began to rise again, whispering against the windows. Shadow, lying by the door, lifted his head, ears twitching. His eyes fixed on something unseen, a sound only he could hear. A soft whine escaped his throat. Grace crouched beside him, stroking his neck. "He still thinks his partner's out there," she murmured. Robert turned away, staring through the frosted glass toward the woods beyond. Maybe he's right. Later that night, Robert sat alone in his office, files spread across the desk. The flicker of the desk lamp cast deep shadows on his lined face. He pulled out an old classified folder marked Project Oath. At the top of the page, the signature of Evan Cole, a name long presumed dead. Beneath it, a report about neurotoxic metals designed to alter obedience patterns. He closed the file slowly, his throat tight. "God help us," he whispered. Outside, the snow began to fall again, soft and soundless. Shadow stirred in his sleep at the clinic, tail twitching, as if dreaming of a voice calling from the frozen river. And somewhere deep in the forest, under layers of ice and silence, a faint echo answered. The forest of Frost Creek lay silent under the weight of snow. a white labyrinth where sound and time seemed to freeze together. On the third day after the storm, a search drone picked up faint heat signatures deep within the timberline, too steady to be an animal. When the rescue team reached the coordinates, they found an old wooden shack half buried in drifts, its roof sagging beneath ice. Inside, beneath torn blankets and a flickering oil lamp, lay Officer Daniel Hayes, barely breathing. His uniform was torn, skin pale as parchment, beard stubbled from 3 days of frost and blood loss. His once sharp blue eyes were glassy, moving without focus. The rescuers called his name, but Daniel only murmured something incoherent, a single word that chilled them. Cole. Daniel was 38, a man built of quiet discipline and scar tissue. In the Boston Police before joining the Montana Force, he was known for his measured tone and for the calm that came after chaos. But those who served with him overseas remembered a different man, one who carried survivor's guilt like a second badge. In Afghanistan, his squad had walked into an ambush that left 6 dead. He lived because a bomb went off a second too late. Since then, he had become a man who believed in order, procedure, and the false safety of routine. That night on the bridge had shattered all of it. When Daniel opened his eyes in the hospital, the light was too bright, the world too quiet. He remembered snow, gunfire, and the metallic taste of blood. His hand instinctively reached for his chest, bandaged, aching. A nurse leaned over him, smiling gently. "You're lucky, officer. They found you in a hunting shack 6 miles from the bridge. Hypothermia, blood loss. But you're alive." Daniel's brow furrowed. "How long?" "3 days," she said softly. "You've been unconscious." Moments later, Captain Robert Miller entered, his heavy coat dusted with frost. His presence filled the small room. "You gave us a scare, son," he said, voice deep and hoarse. Daniel stared at him, searching for memory, but his mind gave only flashes. The storm, the gun, the sound of Shadow barking. "The suspect?" he asked weakly. Robert hesitated. "Gone. Vanished in the blizzard. But you were lucky the dog led them close enough to pick up a signal." Daniel blinked slowly. "Shadow's alive?" "Alive. And waiting," Robert said, with a faint smile that didn't reach his eyes. Not long after, Dr. Grace Nolan arrived, her brown hair still damp from snow, a folder tucked under her arm. She had not slept much since the night she found Shadow covered in frost. She greeted Daniel with the calm, measured tone of someone used to easing both animal and human pain. "I'm Grace Nolan. I've been looking after your partner," she said. "He's been restless, like he knew something was wrong." She set the folder down and met Robert's gaze briefly. Something unspoken passed between them. Then she turned back to Daniel. "Before you collapsed, do you remember anything unusual? Any smell, light, sound?" Daniel tried. His memories came in fragments. A flash of metal, a familiar voice calling his name, then an unbearable pressure in his chest. "There was a man," he whispered. "I knew him. His eyes. I've seen them before." He pressed his palm to his temple, veins tightening against the strain. Then a noise like thunder underwater. Grace noticed his hand trembling and took it gently, her touch steady. "It's okay. You're safe now." But her eyes betrayed doubt. Later, as Daniel slept, she met Robert in the hallway. "It's the same pattern," she said, handing him a blood report. "Traces of that metallic compound, but this time in a much higher concentration." Whatever's in him, it's not just poison. It's reacting with his nervous system. Robert scanned the report, his jaw tightening. Can it be controlled? Maybe, Grace said. But there's something else. The compound interacts with the limbic system, the part that stores emotional memory. If it's what I think, it's not just killing him, it's rewriting him. That evening, Grace brought Shadow into Daniel's room. The German Shepherd was thinner now, ribs faintly visible under his dark coat, but his eyes lit with desperate recognition at the sight of his master. He bounded forward, tail wagging weakly, pressing his muzzle against Daniel's arm. For a moment, the sterile room filled with warmth. Daniel smiled faintly, scratching the familiar spot behind Shadow's ear. "Hey, partner," he whispered. But when Grace stepped closer to adjust the IV line, Shadow suddenly stiffened, ears flat, and began to growl low in his throat. His gaze locked on Daniel's bandaged chest. The sound grew harsher, wilder, as if something about the scent disturbed him. "Shadow!" Daniel said sharply, startled. But the dog only whined, backing away before circling protectively near the bed, never taking his eyes off the wound. Grace froze, realization dawning. "He's sensing something," she said quietly. "Something inside you." That night, Daniel dreamed of sand instead of snow. He was back in Kandahar, the sound of rotors overhead, the scent of burning fuel, and a man standing over a pile of twisted metal. A familiar voice said, "You thought you could bury it, Daniel, but I'm still here." He turned, and the man's face was half obscured by shadow, but the eyes were unmistakable, cold, calculating, belonging to Evan Cole, the military chemist he had once testified against. Daniel woke with a shout, sweat freezing on his skin. Across town, an FBI analyst reviewed grainy footage from a security camera near the regional hospital. The timestamp matched the morning Daniel was found. Through the snowstorm, a tall man in a black coat moved along the back alley, carrying a silver case that reflected the weak light. His face, partially obscured by a scarf, turned briefly toward the camera. Even through the distortion, the analyst whispered, "That's him." Outside, the storm had returned with vengeance. Snow hammered against the hospital windows like waves crashing on glass, and the wind carried a howl that sounded almost human. Inside, the fluorescent lights flickered with uneasy rhythm. In room 312, Officer Daniel Hayes sat awake, staring at his reflection in the dark window. A pale figure, with hollow eyes, bandaged chest, and questions he could no longer silence. The machines beside him beeped in slow, uncertain rhythm, as if mirroring his fractured heartbeat. For 2 days, he had dreamed of Evan Cole, the man from his past who had haunted his waking mind with whispers of guilt and loyalty. Now those dreams felt less like memory and more like a warning. Evan Cole had once been a man of science and command. At 45, he wore the decay of brilliance like a shroud. His once black hair was streaked with gray, his face angular and pale beneath the dim light of the storm. His eyes, icy blue and almost colorless, held the haunted calm of a man who believed the world had failed him first. Once a decorated field chemist for the U.S. military, he had designed biochemical weapons meant to enhance obedience under combat stress. The project, codenamed Project Oath, had been shut down after civilian casualties in Kandahar. Cole lost everything: his rank, his freedom, his name. But what the world called disgrace, he called awakening. Loyalty is chemistry, he had told the tribunal before disappearing, and I've already made it perfect. Tonight, that conviction had brought him back. Dressed in a stolen orderly's uniform, he moved through the hospital's maintenance corridors with a silent precision born of obsession. A small metal case swung from his gloved hand. Inside, 2 syringes, one clear, one silver. His boots left wet prints on the sterile floor, each step accompanied by the faint hum of the storm outside. Upstairs, Dr. Grace Nolan sat in her dim office, her tired eyes scanning Daniel's latest lab results. She was still in her scrubs, her chestnut hair tied back in a hurried knot. The numbers on the screen didn't make sense. The metallic toxin in Daniel's blood, the same she had seen in Shadow, was adapting. Its structure had changed since the last test, becoming more complex, almost self-sustaining. Grace leaned forward, whispering to herself, "It's learning." The thought sent a chill down her spine. She stood, reaching for her coat, intending to warn Captain Miller. Down the hall, Captain Robert Miller was already there, standing outside Daniel's room. His thick shoulders filled the doorway, his face carved from fatigue and resolve. 55 years old, with iron gray hair and the bearing of a man who had seen too many soldiers buried, Robert carried his guilt quietly, like a medal he could never remove. He had once trusted Evan Cole. Years ago, they had shared coffee in dusty tents and talked about ending wars faster. Now, as thunder cracked over the hospital, he realized those conversations had been the first steps toward this nightmare. Daniel stirred when Robert entered. "You can't sleep either," the captain said quietly. Daniel shook his head. "Every time I close my eyes, I see him." "Cole?" "Yes." Daniel looked up, his voice low. "He said I'd helped him finish his work. I don't know what that means." Robert hesitated before answering. "It means you were his last experiment." The lights flickered again. Once, twice, then went out completely. The emergency backup hummed to life seconds later, painting the hallway in dull red glow. The storm outside roared. Grace's voice came through the intercom, tight with urgency. "Captain Miller, get out of that room. Security cameras just picked up an unauthorized entry from the service elevator." Before Robert could react, the door behind him creaked open. A tall figure stepped from the shadows, his face half hidden by the glow of the storm lamp in his hand. "You always were predictable, Robert," Evan Cole said calmly. His voice was smooth, deliberate, carrying the authority of a teacher addressing failed students. The gun in his other hand gleamed faintly under the red light. Grace's warning came too late. Cole crossed the threshold, his steps soundless on the tile. "I didn't come for you," he said to Robert. "I came to finish what began on that bridge." His eyes fell on Daniel. "My masterpiece." Daniel froze, pulse quickening. "You shot me." "I freed you," Cole replied. "That bullet wasn't meant to kill. It carried the final sequence of the Oath compound, a key that unlocks the truth of human loyalty." "You poisoned me," Daniel hissed, gripping the bed frame. Cole smiled faintly. "Poison? No, officer. I purified you." A low growl broke the silence. From the corner, Shadow stirred. The German shepherd's once lustrous coat was dulled, his breathing heavy from the lingering toxin. Yet his eyes blazed with recognition. He rose slowly, legs trembling, fur bristling. Cole's smile faltered. "Ah," he murmured. "The animal, always in the way of progress." When Cole raised his gun, Shadow lunged. a blur of black and tan fur colliding with his arm. The gun fired, shattering a monitor. Cole cursed, staggering back. The syringe case flew open on the floor, silver vials rolling across the tile. Shadow clamped down on Cole's sleeve, teeth sinking through fabric. A shot rang out. Then a cry. The dog fell, whimpering, his side bleeding. "Shadow!" Daniel shouted, tearing at his IV lines. Pain tore through his chest, but adrenaline drowned it. Cole turned back toward him, panting, gun trembling. "You don't understand," he said. "They made me a villain for wanting to save the human race. Loyalty is the only thing that can't be faked. Unless you make it." Grace burst into the doorway, followed by Robert, weapon drawn. "Drop it, Evan," Robert barked. Cole smiled, almost relieved. "You can't kill loyalty," he said softly. "You can only create it, or break it." He moved suddenly, but Robert fired first. The impact sent Cole crashing against the wall, the gun clattering from his hand. For a moment, the storm outside seemed to stop. Daniel collapsed beside Shadow, pressing his hands against the dog's wound, tears mixing with blood. Grace knelt to help, voice trembling. "Stay with us, boy." The German shepherd's eyes fluttered weakly, not in fear, but in defiance, as if even pain could not sever the bond between him and the man he had chosen to protect. Robert stood over Cole's body, his face unreadable as medics rushed in. The dying scientist's lips curled into a faint smile. "You'll see, Daniel," he whispered. "What's loyalty and what's just programming?" Then his head tilted, and he went still. Outside, the storm began to ease. Inside, Daniel held Shadow's paw as the monitors beeped steadily again. But Cole's final words echoed in his mind, like a curse carved into his blood. The snow had begun to melt, leaving behind glistening pools of light that reflected the pale sky over Frost Creek. The hospital stood quiet now, a gray monument against the thawing world. Inside, Officer Daniel Hayes sat by the bedside of his dog, Shadow, whose breathing came slow and shallow beneath a tangle of wires and blankets. The monitors hummed softly, their green lights flickering like fragile hope. Daniel's hands, rough, scarred, still trembling from the past weeks, rested on Shadow's paw. He had survived the toxin, the bullet, and the storm, but watching his partner lying still was a wound no medicine could touch. Daniel's face had changed since the night on the bridge. The once sharp lines of confidence had softened into quiet fatigue. His beard was thicker now, his dark blonde hair grown out and disheveled. But his eyes, pale gray like winter steel, still carried that disciplined calm of a man who'd learned to endure. He had always believed loyalty was choice, not instinct. Yet seeing Shadow lying there, poisoned by the very thing meant to kill him, Daniel began to wonder if love itself was something deeper than either word could hold. Dr. Grace Nolan, standing at the foot of the bed, adjusted the IV with gentle precision. Her face was drawn from sleepless nights. Strands of chestnut hair escaped her bun, catching the sterile light. Grace was never one to cry easily. Years of tending to broken creatures had taught her to channel emotion into quiet action. But this case, this dog, had shaken her. "He's fighting," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "But the compound, it's still in him. It's stable yet alive, almost like it's adapting." Daniel looked up at her. "You said it shouldn't be possible, that he shouldn't have lasted this long." Grace nodded. "He shouldn't. But there's something about the molecular structure, the way it froze his cells instead of breaking them. It's as if the compound went dormant. You mean, I mean Shadow didn't die because he froze from the inside out. He survived because his body used the toxin to preserve itself. Biological stasis. She hesitated, searching for the right words. It's what some call a cryogenic response, nature's version of a miracle. Daniel turned back to Shadow, his voice cracking. You always had a way of breaking the rules, didn't you, partner? His thumb brushed over the dog's paw, remembering every storm, every night patrol, every moment when silence meant trust. He thought of the bridge, of Cole's words. You can't kill loyalty. You can only create it or break it. He wanted to believe that wasn't true. He needed to. Days passed. Outside, winter began to retreat. Snow gave way to wet earth and the first fragile blades of grass. Daniel barely left the hospital. He refused therapy, refused interviews. He spent his hours talking to Shadow about nothing and everything. Sometimes he laughed quietly. Other times he fell silent, the weight of guilt pressing like ice on his chest. He thought of Evan Cole, now dead, his final words echoing through every sleepless night. The dog proved me wrong. Captain Robert Miller came to visit on the morning of the thaw. His heavy coat was damp, his gray hair flattened from the snow. He looked older than before, the kind of old that came from remorse, not years. Cole's dead, he said simply, setting a folder on the table. Poisoned by his own serum. Guess loyalty has a funny way of coming back around. Daniel didn't answer. Robert studied him for a moment, then added quietly, You did good, son. You stopped him. Daniel shook his head. No, Shadow did. His voice trembled slightly, but he didn't look away from the motionless figure on the bed. Later that evening, Grace walked into the room carrying fresh lab reports. Daniel, she began, her voice trembling with something between disbelief and joy. His vitals, they're rising. Daniel stood abruptly, staring as the monitor's beeps grew stronger. Shadow stirred faintly, his head twitching against the pillow. Grace rushed forward, eyes wide. He's waking up. It was slow, fragile, like dawn breaking over frost. Shadow blinked once, then again. His breathing deepened. When his gaze found Daniel, recognition flared. Tired, but certain. The German shepherd tried to lift his head. Daniel leaned forward, tears spilling freely now. Easy, he whispered. You did it. You came back. Shadow's tail gave a weak thump against the sheets. Grace smiled faintly, blinking away tears of her own. Well, she said softly, that's a first. The patient teaching the doctor what survival means. Weeks later, Daniel stood outside for the first time in months. The snow was nearly gone, leaving Frost Creek glimmering beneath a pale morning sun. His shoulder ached from the cold, but it was a good ache, proof of life. Shadow walked beside him, slower now, but steady, his fur gleaming gold in the light. Together, they carried a small wooden cross and a brass plaque engraved with words Grace had chosen. For those who were loyal, even when no one believed. They reached the bridge, rebuilt now, quiet and empty except for the whispering wind. Daniel knelt in the snow, placing the plaque into the earth beside the frozen bank where he had fallen months before. Shadow sat close, head resting gently against Daniel's leg. For a long time, neither moved. The only sound was the thawing river below. Daniel finally spoke, voice low and steady. "Some vows are made by men," he said. "Others by angels with 4 legs." He looked at Shadow, whose eyes, bright and alive, reflected the sunlight like 2 small embers. "Come on, partner," he murmured, standing. "Let's go home." The camera would have pulled back then. The man and his dog, small against the vast field of white, walking toward the rising light. 2 silhouettes carved against the promise of spring. The storm had taken much, but what remained was unbreakable. Sometimes, God doesn't send miracles through thunder or lightning. Sometimes, He sends them quietly, wrapped in fur, with eyes that never judge and hearts that never leave. Daniel and Shadow's story reminds us that even in the coldest winter, loyalty, faith, and love can thaw what the world has frozen. Because miracles aren't always about being saved. Sometimes, they're about learning how to believe again. If this story touched your heart, share it. Let someone else feel the warmth that faith and love can bring. Leave a comment below and tell us where you're watching from, so we can keep you in our prayers tonight. And don't forget to subscribe for more stories of hope, redemption, and the quiet miracles that still walk among us, one paw print at a time. May God bless you, your family, and every loyal heart that still waits by the door.